and welcome to this week's episode of Body Beyond the Scales. Today I am joined by Nathan. We're going to be talking all about his journey through weight loss, but more importantly, we're going to be talking about emotional eating, stress-based eating, and what you can do about it so that it's not completely taking over your life. So first off, without further introduction, Nathan, who are you?
Hello. What a great introduction that was. You can tell you've done this a fair few times. Hi. My name is Nathan Keevil. I am a weight loss coach. I have been doing so for the past 3.5 years now. More specialized in very much similar to yourself, kind of the long-term sustainability side of things, and helping overcoming things like emotional eating, stress-based eating, things of this nature to ensure a healthy and happy long life. That is pretty much my goal. And yeah, so who I am, that's the other thing. So yeah, that's essentially what I do and who I am, how I essentially got here myself. And the reason I kind of got into this industry in my own regard is obviously through my journey and just generally my own loss. As it was essentially something I struggled with more my teenage life than anything else. As I grew up with it, I grew up having to pursue a career in football. That was kind of what led to a lot of my kind of issues. I was always the bigger player, really think, probably why I got shoved in goal more than anything else. But from about 13 onwards, or I say 13 onwards, I can always recall the first kind of thing I've had the issue with my body image and things like that was year four, which I can't remember how old I am, but I think about 9, give or
Yeah,
take,
nine-ish,
at
yeah.
that age. Yeah. I remember getting changed for PE, and a lad had a comment about my flab on my thing, and that was the first thing that stuck to me. I had no inclination of like my body image or anything like that. No, like no child realistically should. But that was like my first thing of like, okay, I'm different to everyone else. I have this little bit aware, and that made me kind of aware. And from that point onwards, I became a little bit more, I guess, obsessed with, the foods I was eating, a little bit more hyper aware of stuff like what I should be and what I should be eating. And it led me down the very much the typical route. So from about 9 years old, I've very much been kind of involved within this world, which now at kind of 26 makes me think, God, it's actually been the majority of my life. But that's been a very prevalent figure, and then probably since about that age, definitely in my younger teenage years, for me, it's been very much I've been dieting. I'm one of those individuals, you name it, I've done it. Yay, we've all heard them. My first slimming club, I think I was about 13 when I first joined it. Went through that whole debacle. Glad I'm not in that kind of sphere of things now. We could both agree with that one, I'm sure. But then, I'd very much do very typical routes, replicate what I'd seen from my parents or what I'd seen from my family. Starve myself be very much the thing. Like if I didn't feel like I was feeling hunger at the end of the night, I was doing something wrong. A lot of these negative options, I'd oversee magazines, gossip mag, stuff like that. I'd read that and see what my mum would be reading on holiday, and I'd be reading those just off the off chance and seeing the tips within that, and that would be the type of thing that would be ingrained within myself. Juice diets, you think of the source that came from it. So growing up, I had a real negative kind of relationship with food in general, and it wasn't until I was 19, I'd been with my wife for a year at that point, and it was realistically the point of like, okay, I do have to make a change. Clearly, everything I've done and everything I've led into my entire life at this point hasn't made a change. I was only increasing in weight. I remember stepping on the scales, I was just getting over 120 kilos. And I was just at the curiosity of like, okay, look in the mirror, didn't like what I looked like. It was actually looking at the BMI calculator. I know BMI is not the greatest indicator in life, but it was seeing as like, oh, okay, you're obese. And that was the kind of thing as like looking in my trajectory in life. And then like I was looking at my wife just in bed. She was just, on her phone. I was there like, okay, I need to be greater in life. I want to have a healthy, happy life, be able to do everything I can do for her. That was my real kind of turning point in that thing. And that's why I really started to take a deep dive into nutrition, started to take a deep dive into exercise, really kind of develop everything from there and get a real understanding that everything that I had been fed for, well, at least like a decade essentially to that point, there's a grain of truth to it, but it was all kind of like there was a subconscious to it. There was a reason why I wasn't seeing success. There was this kind of malnutrition practice of like they want you to return. There was a thing that was like, okay, I don't actually have to give up a bit in Nutella. It's like this is great, you know. It's these core little understandings and these core finances that led me to kind of think, okay, I'm going out of a meal with the family. I don't have to starve myself the entire day. I can actually eat food. I can have, dessert if I choose to have dessert, if that's the choice I make. And then the next day, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be fine. And it was learning a lot of obviously what you preach of like, it's consistency over perfection. And for myself, that got me from 100, 120 kilos. My lightest weight was about 68 kilos. I went to a point where I still had a little bit of that diet culture ingrained to me, where I was kind of like, I need to lose and keep losing. It got to a point
Yeah,
where I lost too much weight. And I can really see that now. But in the moment, I still had that kind of understanding, I had that belief. And it wasn't until I then seeked out help from a coach myself that I kind of think, okay, I did take things a bit too far and really kind of develop my knowledge that bit further. And that's why I still work with coaching that to this day to really enhance my knowledge. And there's always more to learn in this industry.
for sure.
That's like the briefest synopsis of like 15,
Well,
20 years just put into
you're gonna say you
like
encapsulated like 20 years of your life very well there. It's so interesting.
yeah.
Like you and I have such a similar story from the perspective of like I was around the same age. I
Mm,
remember being in that classroom, getting changed, and feeling like mine was actually when you do swimming lessons in year four, and I felt like my body looked different to everybody
mm,
else's body, and that really started to highlight it for me. And again, it was very similar. Like went down the dieting route, like did slimming clubs. I think I did my first slimming club at about 10. I never went to the club, but we did the diet. We went through the motions. We had the
mm,
book, Red Days and Green Days, as it was then for Slimming World. Like, so I did that, did Weight Watchers and did all of these things as a teen. Like, it was the same kind of structure, like, as for you. And again, around a similar age, I was like, actually, this is time to make a change. And it's super, super interesting what you said there as well about the even when you lose weight, to get the diet culture talking out of your head is so, so hard. And it's such a thing that's like hard to do or even recognize, because you still think you want to lose more weight. And that's something that probably took me about 2 years to get out of, is that mindset that there's more to lose, there's more to lose. Because for me, I had to really recognize and go, well, what's the point of losing more weight? And what does that actually mean? What would that mean as a reality for me? And I was like, literally nothing different. Where I'm at right now, live your life, have this
yeah.
flexibility. You're in a body that you like aesthetically, because I think it's okay to have aesthetic goals, but also in a body that can do things that you want to be able to do. You can walk up a hill without getting out of breath. You can run if you want to run. You can do you can do what you want to do with your life. And exactly as you've done, and I know, like, watching your, like, following you on Instagram, you've just run Manchester Marathon. Like, it's a lot about what your body can do, not just like what your body looks like as well. But yeah, it's super interesting to hear your story from like your, like, obviously heaviest to lightest to kind of like where you're at now. So let's talk a little bit more about like for you, how emotional eating affected you and how that stress-based eating affected you in your life.
Yeah, with emotional eating specifically for myself, I kind of divulged myself to be a bit more of a secret eater. That was kind of my sanctuary more than anything else. As I mentioned, I was very much into the football scene. So it was, I was the bigger kid, but I had I guess I placed upon myself this feeling that I had to be perfect as well, in many regards to it, because it was like, you're trying to sign a professional contract, you're around professional clubs. If your peers around you, my family, stuff like that, if they don't think you're perfect, so what does that make me? I'm not taking it seriously. This is my dream. This is everything I put towards. So that was a lot of it for me. Was a lot of the pressure that I'd built up in life, and I guess there's a lot of the stress that was kind of fixated around it, that I couldn't have, okay, Chris, or something like that, because I didn't want anybody to think less of me. I wasn't taking it seriously. So for me, it was like a lot of secret eating. I would have my meal nice and easy, or in between meals, where in my house, where my drinks were located, that was where we kept all like the snack stuff and stuff like that. So I would go out, just go get a bottle of water, feel good. And in that time frame of just me walking, I eat food very quick. I can eat very, very quick. So, I would just shove a packet of crisps down my throat in a matter of seconds, take the evidence, chuck it away, and then just come back, and no one would have an absolute clue. Or I'd bring a spoon out, go to the freezer, thing of ice cream there or two. Do that just to get that release, just to get that kind of sanctuary, that I was essentially craving, because I made this narrative for myself, and I built this up to the point where it's like, I just need that kind of release. So that's more specifically, like I said, for anyone in life, it will look in different in some way, shape, or form, with any form of emotional or stress-based eating. But that is kind of I put it upon myself more than anything else, and it took me a long time to realize that, and yeah, it took me years to even reflect back upon it. As like I'd never recognized it. It wasn't like I had this light bulb moment, and it was just like, oh, I've got to fix this. I never realized. It's just part and parcel of life, and I think that's where, even for a lot of us, it can be just kind of like seen as normality within culture, for things like this to even occur, and not to perceive it as a potential issue that has to be addressed in our lives. That's really where it kind of maintained, just held it for me.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because as you said there, like we see almost emotional eating and stress-based eating as normal. Like if you think of any film, especially like
Mm.
any film where there's been a breakup, it's super normal to see the actress generally like sat on her bed eating her ice cream, like crying into a box of chocolates. That is a very classic trope that's been like perpetuated for years, like especially in the 2000s, like especially when we were like I'm thinking of Legally Blonde. There's a scene in Legally Blonde where she just sat eating chocolates, and that is that emotional eating. But we're told that this is normal. This is almost how you behave. I remember having a thought as a teenager, like, oh, I almost wish that I could be in a relationship with someone so that we could break up and I could get the emotional eating pleasure from with the guilt-free pleasure, because that's what it felt like. That felt guilt-free to me because it was almost like it was seen as normal. Like, and it was such a strange like thought to have, but also at the same time, like you can see exactly where it came from because we have normalized certain aspects of emotional eating.
Yeah, and when it comes to just using like food as I suppose, as a coping mechanism in this regard, it is obviously worth noting that I think in some cases it is a good thing. It's a healthy thing. It is obviously part of our life, especially with bigger events that we have normalized. It can be good because it creates that release, and it could be the deterrent from a worse factor. But I think as it is projected as a normal thing, if it's occurring in normal everyday life based upon everyday things that you are putting to yourself, that is when you kind of got to take that step back and think, okay, this definitely needs to be addressed. Especially if it's something like, let's say work related or anything like that. We all face stresses in life in some way, shape, or form that will always overwhelm us. But if you're coming back from work, and let's say every Friday, and it's kind of like, yes, that weekend release is there, and that's kind of the trigger point that then spirals into an entire weekend essentially of it. It's kind of okay, that's when definitely needs to be addressed, and it's a further problem than just I need to lose a little bit of weight.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I like to explain when people are in this situation that they're emotionally eating is you're emotionally eating for a reason, and it's because your brain has associated this as being something that's a successful tool. It's just that right now you only have the one tool of emotional eating to deal with your stress, your boredom, your tiredness, your loneliness, your angriness, like whatever it is that's kind of triggering you to to eat. But there's a reason why your brain is going for that, and there's a reason why you're doing that, and it's because it's become a habit, and it's because your body has been rewarded and your brain has been rewarded for doing it in the past, and it's gone, this is the technique, this is how we solve the problem, and there's a reason you're doing that, and it's because it works. Like it works, but is it if just because it works it doesn't mean that you should do it.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. And like you said there, the brain will reward it, and the more and more you do something, neurological synapse capacity strengthen, it becomes harder to do it. Things like neuroplasticity, for instance, it is more difficult, of course, as we get older, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. There are other tools out there. It can be tough to overcome. It will be tough to overcome. There will be hurdles in place. But like you said, there's other tools in place that are going to mean it's going to have a greater outcome. Like you said, you can return to, like I said before, it's like you can use food as a better outcome than certain things in certain scenarios. And the same works on the flip side. You can use other tools in spite of food for a greater outcome, especially if your health is more of a priority now. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
It's one of those really interesting things, isn't it, neuroplasticity? And I'll just break down what the concept means for anyone that's listening and is like, what on earth are you chatting about? Plasticity is basically the idea that your brain is malleable, it's adaptable throughout your entire life, and that it can change and mold, and it can like keep making new connections in the brain. We used to believe basically that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but it turns out you can. The brain is malleable, it keeps learning. It's just in the first roughly 25 years of your life, it's more like open for learning, which is why if you've got emotional eating habits and they were built as a teenager, as a child, they can feel like autopilot. Like you can almost feel like you've got no control over them because you've been doing them for so long, but also that they've been ingrained when your brain was in its most plastic, most malleable form. So it's really important to recognize that like you've got these again, you've got these habits here for a reason. Like they were serving a purpose at some point, and it wasn't a conscious decision that you made to go, I'm going to eat this chocolate's going to make me happy, or whatever it is that you eat. But yeah, it's important to recognize that like your brain can still form new connections. So even if you're 30, 35, 40, 50, 60, like however old you are, your brain can still make these changes. So if you're thinking right now, I'm a lost cause, you're not. Like you can still, because of neuroplasticity, you can still learn to make new changes.
It's the great thing. It's never, never a point where you go, it's too late. And that's
Yeah.
the wonderful thing of it, that you've seen people in their 20s be able to change their life, people in their 60s be able to change their life. It is never a point where it's like, it's past my time. We can always look back, and I think we all kind of go, "Oh, if I just started then, think of where I've been now." We can always look back and regret those things, of course we can, but the matter of fact is we're in the present day. Seize the opportunity ahead of you.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about triggers for emotional eating then. What are the most common triggers that like basically kick off an event or an episode of emotional eating for someone?
It's very interesting, because obviously we look into as an individual, like individual basis, and well, there's obviously going to be commonalities that obviously form within it, but it is also worth noting that to anyone listening, it's kind of like your triggers are going to be the most important. Just because if we mention a certain trigger and you're not experiencing it, or you experience it yourself, doesn't mean that your emotional eating is anything less. It's all based upon perception at the end of the day. It is all based upon your resilience in life. Now, everybody's going to see different forms of resilience. If we look at certain individuals in life, certain jobs, so carers, for instance, those individuals who have to look after family members, stuff like that, 24/7, done that for years. Those are typically some of the most resilient people on the earth because they have to do the same job day in, day out, super hard job for someone that means a lot to them, for a different person. They are usually extremely resilient. Compare that to an individual probably in their early 20s who's had a very good upbringing, great family unit, stuff like that, handed opportunities to them, their resilience is probably going to be a hell of a lot lower. So something that is for one individual, just kind of they can flick it off and be fine with, to the other can be a trigger that then leads to emotional eating. When we look at emotional eating and stress-based eating, generally speaking, it's usually kind of a build-up of things. It is everyday life. It's very much, your amygdala is kind of looking at different sensors throughout the day. It's kind of just flashing constantly. And then you get to the point of kind of being a bit of a fight or flight response. That's kind of that trigger. When you get into that response, that's when obviously we seek food. Now, typically, when we seek triggers, like I said, it is based upon the individual. And it is kind of based upon kind of being built up throughout the day. When we look at kind of the generic kind of individual, generic person in everyday life, a lot of it tends to be work related. That kind of gets built up. That is one of the kind of key triggers. It is usually, having a, I don't know if I can swear on this or not, if you're all good with
Yeah, no, go
swearing.
for it.
Um, if you have a shit bus, there we go. Because I couldn't think of another word. um, if you're having a real crap day, and shit bus just gets on your nerves, that can just be that kind of solace, that quick little trigger that you get in, you get home, you found your sanctuary, and then, or if it's on the way home, could be either or, of course. And then it's just like, okay, that's when it can kind of unfold, and you can just kind of let loose because you've out of work, you've escaped work, you're in that state, you're in that fight or flight, you're looking for something to kind of escape, and that is what that could be. I think that's more than anything else in today's society, probably one of the more common things, as well as probably it could be a little bit dependent on social media, as well, and a lot of the kind of the build up that comes from that, especially if you find yourself as an individual who kind of compares himself to others. It can be an extremely stressful strait to be in. Looking into things, thinking why I'm not here. So whilst there's a lot of good that comes from social media, and obviously there's a lot of obviously negatives as well. It can be one of those states that really do actually just trigger something for someone, thinking, okay, I'm not as good as thing, and think, oh, what's the point of me? Especially when you see weight loss accounts, if you follow them along, they can be inspiring, but in the same light, they can look, oh, well, she lost 3.5 pounds this week, I lost 1 pound. I'm a bit shit, aren't I? And it can be the thing of like, well, what's the point? and then we throw away an entire week and think, yeah, okay, we'll start again on Monday. It's very much the typical saying, draw a line in the sand, start again on Monday.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting point, actually. Can I just jump in on that one? With the all or nothing mindset, it's so common that if you are in this kind of like all or nothing mindset with your weight loss and you're trying to lose weight, and emotional eating is a pattern that you've established at some point within your life, if you're trying to lose weight and you feel like you're failing and you feel like it's not going well because you've only lost a pound this week and someone else has lost 3 pounds and you're in this comparison trap and you're in this all or nothing mindset, the first thing that you kind of want to look for is asking yourself, or rather, if you are emotionally eating, there's kind of two ways that you want to deal with it. One is a long-term way and one is a short-term way. The short-term we'll go into detail with, but just to like touch on the long-term stuff, you want to think about how you can get out of this all or nothing mindset. Because if you're not perpetually in this state of comparison, in this state of like, we're going all in or not at all, that's going to make it a hell of a lot easier. And that's where using things like consistency, not perfection, and the next best thing mindset, which I talk about all the time, will really help you like reduce the amount that you're emotionally eating in general and reduce the amount of incidents where you're having these comparisons that are going to kick that off. And another thing just to touch on there that you mentioned as well was about fight or flight. If you're in a life where you're constantly on high alert, you're constantly under stress, you've constantly got people, you feel like you're fighting fires in every direction, you're going to be more likely to emotionally eat because you're basically at your capacity all the time. If you are super chill, you're in retirement, nothing bothers you, every day is a nice leisurely walk at the beach, like, and like if we're like in that chill zone and like nothing's bothering you, the amount of like stress that you'd have to be under, the amount of like yeah, like volume of stress that you'd have to be under to potentially kick off that emotional eating is going to be a lot higher if if your baseline is a lot lower. So if you feel like you're constantly in this state of fight or flight, again, as a long-term strategy, we want to look at how we can bring those like your overall energy and your overall general state to not being in fight or flight 24/7 because that's not serving you either. But again, those are both longer term strategies, but we'll talk through those in more detail. Sorry to cut you off there, Nathan. Continue.
Oh no, no, good. It's extremely valid points to be making, regarding that, especially when it comes to the all or nothing mentality. There's such a plethora of things that need to be discussed and highlighted with it. Of course, and obviously this is very much ties in greatly towards it. But no, yeah, like I mentioned, when it comes to triggers, when we look at more specific triggers that tend to typically occur, it's kind of just it is just for anybody listening or just generally thinking, it is just kind of what the key points of life are. Like I mentioned, it tends to be work related, it tends to be social media related. It can be a lot of the things that we place upon ourselves. As I kind of mentioned, this kind of narrative that we serve our life in, we very much do live in a kind of spotlight effect environment where we are the main character, and that's how we can kind of perceive things in many ways. Where in life, it doesn't have to obviously be the case. So if you have projects coming up, if you have certain big life events, these typically are the type of things that can perpetuate this type of emotional eating to occur, where we can kind of build up, and anxiety can definitely build up, and try to think about the worst case scenario that's going to happen. You got to do a talk for work. Okay, what if I fumble my lines? What if I don't remember? We're talking about what if the team laugh at me? If we can kind of build this narrative up before anything's even happened, and really just kind of ruminate over these thoughts, then that's going to lead us to be a little bit more inclined. It can be having a family barbecue at the weekend, especially if you're feeling quite negative about, let's say, your body image or anything like that. It's thinking, is someone so going to say a comment about me? I'm trying to lose weight, but I really would like to have a burger. Am I going to be told, should you really be eating that? And it's just the build up of just what even the future can hold, and not even kind of taking advantage and living in the present can be a huge trigger, just to then emotionally lead. And then obviously we'll then take all the negative consequences that comes off the back of that, which can then further perpetuate this motion of emotional eating, because obviously we don't typically feel great for doing it. It's not usually something that's a conscious choice. It is something we just do as a result of everything that's happening around us. So then we feel guilty. We feel very stressed off the back of it. We will inflict a lot of kind of self-blame upon ourselves. I've been trying to be good. My willpower is nothing. It's just, how do people do it? And there's that feeling of even incorporating emotional based eating into your life can then be a tide to then actually go on and emotionally eat more. Stress is one of the biggest things. We know that individuals who use food as a coping mechanism are, or 50% at least, live more stressful lives. It's a statistic that can't be kind of overlooked. So it's a horrible cycle to be left in. You live a more stressful life, you then emotionally eat, you then feel worse off it, which then leads to more stress. You emotionally eat, and you then enter life again feeling more stressed out. So you're then more inclined to emotionally, and you're just caught over and over and over again. Um, it's very hard to kind of pinpoint triggers. And I don't just kind of feel like this is the thing because it is so working with 100 people on it. It is so individualized, and for one person, what is a huge trigger in their life, and like I mentioned before, it doesn't even bat the eyelid for someone else, and that is such an important point to always remember as a person. You're always going to be the most important person in this journey. To always remember that.
For sure. And like knowing your personal triggers is much more useful than us saying like, yeah, well, in general, like triggers are work. But like
Yeah.
you are like, yeah, no shit. Like like I know work stresses me out and I know like I want to get home on a Thursday night and all I want to do is click on Deliveroo and order something. Like it's so common like to like have these behaviors. But like again, as you said, for what triggers one person might not trigger another. A conversation with a boss might trigger one person, but a conversation with a boss might not trigger another. So it's really important to look and identify what's going on for you. And how do you find then? So say we are the individual now when we're no longer Jenny
Mhm.
generic. Say we're the individual. What what are good ways to start spotting those triggers? What are good ways to start spotting those patterns?
For me, straight away, if I'm reflecting back upon like previous instances I've ever had, it is to first actually reflect upon it, to take that time to acknowledge it. I think, as we mentioned before, it can be seen as a bit of a normality. To be able to first and foremost get that understanding of, okay, this has happened as a result of X, Y, Z is a really kind of key first point. It's just having that acceptance, being honest to ourselves that okay, we have actually overindulged and it's something that we didn't want to happen. It is something that is definitely probably placed upon your general work stresses or whatever it may have been. Having that acceptance first and foremost, taking that time to then obviously reflect upon it. I think something like journaling is obviously a good thing. I think if you can put your words to kind of paper as well, if you don't have somebody to talk to about it, and to have that back and forth conversation, it's going to be that little bit more impactful just to be able to write it out because you're then going to be able to, process things a little bit better. You're going to be able to remember things a little bit more. If you say things out loud, it's great, but then sometimes you won't obviously remember the conversation you've had with yourself, and there's not going to be that back and forth where someone can hold you accountable to be able to bring up a certain point. So writing it down is a great thing to do. When we would do this, I would always kind of recommend to leave it a couple of days first and foremost. As I mentioned before, those who are stress-based eaters, or those who emotionally eat, typically speaking, you're going to live a more stressful life. So one of the greatest things you can try to do first and foremost, and this never goes down well, is look to remove a bit of stress from your life. Take yourself out of a deficit for a couple of days. Yes, you've overeaten. Yes, I know you're trying to lose weight. It's never the greatest thing. You've just overindulged. You've gone 4,000 calories over your deficit. Okay, I understand that. Bring yourself back to a little bit of a baseline. Bring your food up for a couple of days. Take exercise out if that's something that stresses you in life. You want to just control the elements of life you can control at least for about a 3 day period, give or take. If you can do it up to a week, fantastic. But I'd say at least 3 days, just try to take some elements away, do something you enjoy rather than, going to the gym if that's something that stresses you out. Take tracking away for a little bit if you find that super stressful and you just want to, practice a little bit of mindfulness during this time. Or you're incorporating, a meal of protein with every single meal. You're getting some fruits and veggies within there and just meeting those baselines. Then start to look through and think about that reflection type process. Really kind of going to the whole day realistically. Well, everything that led up to that point from start to finish. Each different baseline, and then start to think about how that made you feel. What was the reaction to that? Okay, let's say it is that conversation with a boss. What would the conversation involve? Okay, what is it he's doing? Is it their demeanor? Is it what the conversation itself entailed? What was the emotion before the conversation? What was your emotion after that conversation? Using a tool called the emotional wheel, for anybody who doesn't know, is a fantastic tool. Please do look it up. Us as human beings, we are typically very shit at actually empathizing what our emotion is. We will ask somebody, "How do you feel?" Yeah, all right. Yeah, all right. It's a great answer just to say as a offhand, but it's not an actual emotion. If we're feeling good or bad, okay, let's look a step further. Okay, are we feeling stress? Okay, fantastic. Are we then feeling, overwhelmed or out of control? These are greater things to be able to really pinpoint things to get a greater understanding as to how certain triggers then affect you in life. And then as a result, it's going to be able to enable you to find the best type of tools and outcomes that are going to be able to be used instead of having food. So really get a good kind of understanding, get a good detailed thing of your entire day, what the main trigger points were throughout the entirety of the day, because it can be and it will be a kind of build up throughout it. And also attached to it, if there is at all, any behaviors you've done as a result. So if it is kind of like you had the conversation with the boss and then let's say you went and grabbed, as I said, you went out for a walk or whatever it may be. If there's anything like that, see if there's anything underlying that you're already implementing, and that could be a great first point to kind of try to subdue things from the kind of get go. If not, then obviously just keep writing, of course. But yeah, that's the first thing I would do is just get that kind of good understanding, and then you can then have a good kind of overview. This is what led to it. Okay, now where do I go from here?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those really interesting things as well, as you said, like if we break it down and kind of like look at those steps like the after the moment, using almost like what's just happened, we can use that to reflect on what we're going to do differently next time. And I think a lot of the time when we put like post it, as you said, like within those few days post it, you're feeling so guilty and overwhelmed from it that like you're not in the right headspace to analyze it and think outside of your head and think out like other thoughts. You're still in this state where you're ruminating, you're in it, you're in your mind, like it's really still under that high stress. You almost need to have that calm down period afterwards. Now, the more you practice this, the better you get at managing those stresses, the faster that time will become. So I know for me, like I don't need to leave it 3 days anymore. Like if I emotionally eat, which does sometimes happen, like I can leave it an hour and then I can deal with it and be like, oh well, that was that job done. And that is because like, and then look, this came because of this. You were feeling like this. Yeah, and pull those things together. But that's from years and years and years of practicing this. Of course, when I first started thinking about this, it took me a few more days to just first off take responsibility for what I'd just done, and then have that acceptance of going, that's okay, that's done. You were in control. Like it wasn't anybody else's fault that this emotional eating happened, but there were other people that triggered it, or there were other things that triggered it. And I think that's something that's really important, what you mentioned, that like a lot of the time what we want to do is be passive with things. We want to almost give up that locus of control to other people or other situations or other events. And sometimes just bringing it back to yourself and going, okay, well, what was within my control? Like, okay, I wasn't expecting to be shouted at by my boss, but I could have just taken a moment when I sat in the car and before I set off driving, just done some deep breaths. Like before I set off, instead of driving straight home, angrily driving, shouting at the other drivers on the road, straight into Asda, straight to the chocolate aisle. What was it that you could have done, like to kind of like slow that process down? And again, hindsight's 2020, as we know, but like having the ability to slow down and slow the whole process down is really useful. But yeah, I just want to summarize kind of what you've said into like those actionable steps there. So first off was kind of like taking responsibility and having an acceptance that it has just happened. The next thing is to, after, basically leave it a couple of days, or rather this might happen in a couple of days anyway, and then journal on it and actually think about what happened, but not just in the moment, what happened in the whole day before that, because chances are it was lots of little triggers that led to a big trigger that kind of just tipped you over the edge, or rather another little trigger that tipped you over the edge. And then kind of just working through that, working through the emotions, working through the behaviors, and thinking like what's basically going on, and then basically summarizing all that with, and could I handle that differently next time, and how could I handle that differently next time, and coming up with an alternative route. One thing to mention here is that the brain, like almost if you pre-practice alternative routes, it's a lot easier because you've already seen it in your mind of what you could do. So if you're like, actually next time what I could do is get into the car, I'm upset, I'm angry. What I'm going to do is call my mum on the way home. I'm going to have a rant on the way home to her, and where I'm going to take a few deep breaths and I'm going to have a rant, but get it out of my system. And by the time that I get home, I'm going to be in a better headspace because she'll have told me basically get a grip. in the nicest northern way possible. And yeah, we'll be back on track. So yeah, like things like that, and just kind of practicing what you could do, or mentally practicing, mentally rehearsing what you could do, is really, really powerful as well.
Oh yeah, 100% there. Because like if you don't essentially make a plan to take things forward, you're then going to be relying upon your subconscious once again. And if you don't actively have something in place and you haven't put it out there, you're going to go back to the same behavior as before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same idea of if you go in with the same inputs, you don't change anything. Why would you expect a different output? Like the thing didn't
Yeah.
change. It's really important to think about how you can make those changes, and like think about what you can do to keep like create a new path, rather than trying to just do the same thing again and then banging your head against the wall because you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
So
I,
let's go.
I know. I was just going to say, just going back on your point as well, what you were saying, it was very actually good to obviously highlight when it comes to the amount of time you would actually then leave it. It is going to be very different from person to person. The main thing you are just obviously looking to do is just to remunerate and take away that kind of stress from your life, and it will look different from person to person. Some people will do more. The more you do it, as Holly said, the more comfortable you're going to be. You know, the main reason we look to do it is because when you are obviously in a heightened stress environment, your memory recall capabilities just aren't going to be as good. So for myself and Holly, if we do obviously emotionally eat, it's going to happen, and that's something always to remember within yourself anyway. It is going to happen in some way, shape or form. It's not going to take days and days for this to occur. We can do it in a much quicker rate because obviously it's something that's been practiced. It's something that can definitely start to process a lot quicker, and we can take ourselves out of that stress environment. If you've been in it for decades, unfortunately, and you've been in this kind of dieting loop, it is probably going to take a little bit more of that week time to really come out of it and to really kind of not marinate over those thoughts of guilt and stress. So yeah, I just want to say that was a fantastic point, essentially.
So let's talk a little bit about those strategies then that we can use on the like on the short term and the long term like kind of sphere. But let's start off with the short term. We've obviously spoken through kind of like the what to do in the moment or what to do immediately afterwards. But what about alternatives then? So say we're coming up with those alternative routes. One thing I mentioned there was obviously calling someone. Like I've definitely done that. Like I've rang my mum or I've rang like my partner and been like, I'm upset. And like gone down the phone and handled it that way. But what other techniques have you got for kind of like calming yourself down in the moment or dealing with it that's not emotionally eating?
Yeah, there's a lot of different, obviously, things that we can look to implement. And as we said before, this works great as an individual basis because you know yourself as a person what is going to take you out of that state more than anything else. But obviously, these are just going to be a few kind of generic things. What I always like to try to do is tends to think about stress, likes to come to think as a overwhelming factor of life. It's something that's always kind of on top of you. One of the greatest kind of I guess outcomes that you can do is kind of look into okay a little bit of escapism in some way shape or form, something that can be incorporated just kind of anywhere in day-to-day life, something that can just take you out of the world of stress, really just get 15-20 minutes just away from yourself. So obviously you can look to do kind of like I guess even walking to some degree can be that great thing because you can kind of just take yourself away, put a pet headphones in, listen to a podcast, listen to some music, just really escape things and be just with yourself in the moment. It's a great thing to incorporate. Reading is a fantastic thing that can take you out of it because you put yourself into a weird little fantasy world with wizards and dragons. It's not going to be anything that's going to be part of your life, and you just kind of forget about the world around you. The same thing happens with video games. You know, you can play on your phone, you can play in Pokemon. You forget about, what your boss has said to you. You more care about leveling up your Charizard at the end of the day. These are just things that can just kind of separate it and take you away from life, and it's allowing you that capability to be able to take yourself out of that fight or flight response. You're allowing something to come into place into your life that's going to remove that kind of urge, take you out of that fight or flight, and remind yourself that you are safe. We can't fight off bears and stuff like that anymore. As much as that's going around Instagram at the moment about fighting gorillas. It's just not the environment we find ourselves in. So there are obviously outcomes like this, and I think escapism is one of the greatest things that we can do. Obviously, I obviously mentioned mentioned walking within the first instance as well, which is a very easy thing. As you mentioned, being on the phone, it's a great source of an outcome. Typically, I pair that with like having a cup of tea because I think it's one of the greatest things just to really soothe. There's a particular drink that you can just kind of have just to use as that kind of substitute. It's a great thing. It's nice and soothing. I'll put a cuppa on. I will call my mum. Gonna have a great time. You just then that 20 minutes flies by, and then by the time you finish having that conversation, you finish that cuppa, you kind of forget about the scenario, you forget about the situation, you're ready just to move on within life. Other outcomes and other outlooks you can look into as alternate behavior. If you have the time, I think water is a great thing in some way, shape, or form. I'll be a little bit more specific than just obviously grabbing a bottle of water. But if you can find, if you have an area where you can walk that it's near a body of water, if you can have the capability to run yourself a bath or have a shower, these are fantastic things through something known as the blue mind effect. Now, essentially, when you find yourself near a body or if you submerge yourself within water, it has a very calming effect for the body, puts you in a very meditative state. So as I mentioned before, when you take yourself out of the fight or flight, you want to calm yourself, and this is one of the nicest ways to just be able to calm yourself if you find it relaxed. People love a bath. It's such a nice, relaxing thing. It takes you out of that moment. You forget about the world around you. You forget about your stresses. You just unwind. You untangle yourself. And then the complete opposite side of the spectrum, which can also be effective to use the stress for good, is to use exercise. It is something that is just going to be able to, when you look at something like HIIT, for instance, or a quick bout of a run, it's one of those things where you can use that stress for good. You can just use it to kind of put it into it. A lot of people that they tend to do things like boxing or anything like that, they would literally say it's like it is just that outlet to take the stress out of their day onto something. They are just punching it away essentially. It's a fantastic outlet to be able to use that stress for good. The reason I say more like hit or run or anything like that is because we don't know when we're going to be in that state. We don't know when stress-based eating is going to occur. We can find the triggers and we can find the correlations within life, but it can happen at any point at the end of the day. I think when it comes to running or it comes to a hit workout, you can be away on a holiday, you could be, just away for work or something like that. It's something you can just get done for free in a room on its own, and it's done. It's quick YouTube video, put it on. Everyone has access to the internet pretty much nowadays at any point. So you're in a good spot to be able to take yourself out of that, feel good about it afterwards, and then to be able just to shower, wind, and have a good time from that point.
For sure. A few that I use as well, like that kind of link to those. I often like run my hands under cold water. I find that a changing
Mm.
temperature really just helps me like almost focus on that rather than focusing on something else, like or whatever's like bothering me. Because I'm like, oh, it's cold. Like you're more focused on the changing sensation. Getting outside works the same as well, especially if it's cool on the night. Obviously, we're coming into British summer, so yeah, that might change. But like cooler temperatures, but also removing myself from the environment that's triggering me is really, really useful as well. Because even if it's just swapping rooms, say I'm in the living room, say I swap to like the bedroom upstairs, like whatever it is, just to change where I am so that I'm not just sat stewing in the same environment. Another one is I stick on Taylor Swift Shake It Off and quite literally shake it off. And that really, really helps me like just get rid of it. Like literally just, it almost feels like as I'm doing it, everything dissipates. And I would like the dancing is questionable, but it's the most fun thing for me to do. And I find that it really, really calms me down and it's fantastic as a process. Another thing as well there, now you obviously mentioned about getting out on a walk. One thing that I can find is if I'm like really in my head and I need to let my thoughts out, sometimes I like to do what I call an empty walk. So I actually take my headphones out. I don't listen to music. I don't listen to a podcast. I don't listen to anything. I just let my thoughts come and go, and it's almost like meditative. So again, like
Mm.
meditation doesn't have to be like sit and hold your fingers together and go, like that's not what meditation is. For the most part, like it's getting outside. It's like doing the things that you want to do. It can be active. It doesn't have to be this like passive thing where you're like, what am I doing? So that really works for me as well, is that empty walk where I can just let my thoughts come and go. But if I'm walking at the same time, I'm not emotional eating because I'm not taking food out of the house with me. And if I want to walk to Morrison's or I want to walk to Asda to get some chocolate, absolutely, you've got unconditional permission to do that. But I never do. I'm usually out on a loop and I'm like, nah, I feel much better now. Like everything has gone. Do you have any strategies, Nathan? What do you use?
What do I use personally? Whenever I feel more, like I mentioned before, a good cup of tea is realistically one of those things for me. Especially if I'm in the house, obviously with work and that, I'm here like 99% of the time. So it is just find that like, and like you said as well, changing that environment up. I will be at this desk pretty much all the time. If this is what's causing me stress or anything like that comes up, it is for me going downstairs, grabbing a cup of tea, sitting down on my sofa, just sticking something on telly, And that is just an episode of The Simpsons. That's like my safe haven in life. It's just, put on the early seasons, got a cuppa, have that, enjoy it, return back to life afterwards. I'm in a good
Yeah.
place, pretty much. That is my going to be my go-to. If I don't have that available and I'm like out and about or things of this nature, or if I'm away, for instance, very similar to yourself, it is heading on a walk. I always put headphones in because that is just how inclined I am. I will just there and I will just listen to music that reminds myself of good times. I will very much listen to early 2012 grime music that just brings me back to kind of happier times to my childhood and stuff like that. It's just a great remission point. So it's just for me, it's like one, it's very clearing. One, I'm feeling good because I'm getting out and being active. It's great for my mind, great for my health. But then in the same light, it's just reminding myself of good times, and it's just flooding back kind of good memories, and that's why I synonymize that type of music with.
For
Yeah.
sure. It's one of those things as well. Like, I mean, questionable on the 2012's grime whether that would be my choice of music compared to Taylor Swift. But it's obviously the different strategies, like the different things. Like,
Yeah.
you've got to find what works for you. Like, what works for Nathan, what works for me is slightly different. But like, they're strategies that we've developed and we've figured out through trial and error. I've tried things that have not been successful. Like, I've tried, yeah, I've definitely tried techniques. I'm trying to think of any now, but like, they have not worked out, and therefore I've gone right. Well, never doing that again. Like, so actually it's about practicing, about doing things. And one thing that I find is, on now moving on to those longer term strategies, is thinking about general overall stress management. I don't get triggered by emotional eating that much anymore because I manage my stresses and I manage my key triggers. So for me, loneliness is a massive, massive trigger. So if ever I know I'm going to be by myself, I ask myself, what am I doing in that time? And I pre-plan it in. It might be that I'm going to be sat by myself and I'm going to be reading, or I'm going to be watching a TV show, I'm going to be doing something, but I pre-plan what I'm going to do so that I'm not in this state where I'm like, I'm lonely and I'm bored and I don't know what I'm doing, and I feel really alone. And yeah, so I always make sure I've got a plan in place before I have that. And if a bout of spontaneous, all of a sudden Julia's back from work late or whatever, like I always just find a way to manage it. And like, again, it's a lot easier to manage if you're not perpetually under this like cycle of stress, like, and you're not constantly just being like triggered and you're not living in fight or flight. I spend most of my time in a pretty chilled out state, I would say, these days, which makes it a heck of a lot easier to handle emotional eating when it does kind of like, when the opportunity for it does rise.
100%. And like you mentioned before, anything that we mentioned may or may not work. I forget the name of it with the precise isn't, but I know there's so one of the things I used in fast food track for was useless for myself. I forget what the sensation is called, but so when you grab a muscle and you tense the muscle and it's a feeling to do that. I always stand here and just be like, I'm just holding onto my arm. It's doing nothing for me. But I know individuals that will do that, and it's one of the greatest things for them to really take themselves and to have something to focus on. So you can use something, and it can be absolutely totally useless, of course, and then it's just moving on to the next tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's about, again, yeah, finding what works for you. And like for me, if I did that, I'd be like, right, I'm just grabbing my arm here. Like, it's not getting me
Yeah.
anywhere. But again, different tools, different people, different things work for different people, and that's okay. So, what are your strategies then for reducing your overall, I guess, state of fight or flight? Like, what do you do to keep yourself in a chiller state than just constantly fire alarms going off?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is being on top of everything, scheduling. That is kind of like my number one thing because especially with work and everything around us, it feels like, especially when you get into the thing as well, when you're into your health and you got to start thinking about the gym or you got something about meal prepping potentially, whatever it may be, it feels like you've got so much to do in life. And when you, I don't think, actively write it out, when you don't have a good understanding of what it actually is or what a week entails, it becomes super overwhelming because you think you've got a million and one different things to be able then to put the pieces together and to be able to fit it in. That in itself, it can be very stressful and really kind of just add a lot more pressure to life. So even the tasks you are doing, you're thinking you could be out for a walk, saying, okay, I got to go get my steps in. But then as you got your steps in, you're thinking, okay, now I've got to do X, Y, and Z as well. And when I get back, I've got to do that. So you can really, even just like doing the tasks that are going to be quite helpful along your health journey, they can then incur more stress and things like that. So I think just generally, even if it's just for a day-to-day basis, writing out what needs to be done in a day, getting a real kind of just core understanding of what comes to life, what structure is kind of involved, can be a big way to kind of at least alleviate a lot of that unnecessary kind of build up of stress. When you then get that good understanding, you can then kind of look to put in the core elements of life. Okay, I'm going to be at work from this time to this time. I've got to get the kids ready at this time to this time. I've got to drop them off here. All right, if I got to get how many gym sessions can I get in a week? Okay, let's say 3 is going to be a goal. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. At these times, this is when I can slot those in, and you can just kind of start to form your life a little bit more. This doesn't have to be a strict military operation that you've put in, that you've got to be at the gym at 4:14 and you've got to be there on the second. There can be some leeway, but as long as you've got a good kind of base understanding, I think that in itself can alleviate a lot of the kind of unnecessary pressure we can place upon ourselves. Because I'll find that all the time. If I think I've got a million one different things to do, and you're probably good as Holly, as a business owner, there's always something else to be done. At the end of
Always
the
something
day,
else to be done.
there's no task that always going to be. So if we really just kind of put ourselves in this state of thinking, oh, okay, there's one more, there's one more, there's one more, and we don't write it down, we don't kind of even put like an endpoint for ourselves in place. Like for me, I also will schedule in off time because I am awful for that. I will just be here because there is something else to do. It gives me something then to look forward to. It allows me to have that opportunity to be able to unwind in the evening, so I don't have that constant bit of pressure on me. I won't be on my phone from 9:30 every single day because of that state. If I need to do something, if somebody needs me, there's obviously the opportunity they can actually get hold of me. But unless that, I'll be on my phone again at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's good from that point. So that's the first thing I think first and foremost that most people could probably just do, just even get a general understanding, kind of how the thing looks like, um, or at least that's at least for myself probably the most important thing that I did that really had the biggest impact on my life.
I'm very similar, like having a schedule and having a like rough plan. But I think this goes back to what you said at the beginning about resilience. Like the more resilient you are and the more you practice the skill of resilience, the easier it will be for you to deal with stressful events. So like if you're someone who has had to, or like you've put yourself and you've pushed your comfort zone, whether that be on purpose or by accident, because some people, if you haven't got these if you haven't got these situations in life where you've had to become resilient, then you might not have developed that skill. So you can start to do that. You can push your comfort zone, whether that is going to the gym because you've never been to the gym, whether that is signing up for a half marathon because you want to start running and you don't have a clue what you're doing with running, like whatever that is, but like building that resilience over time and slowly progressively pushing your comfort zone is really, really important because that will make it a lot easier to handle stresses when they come up. And also in your general day-to-day life. So having that schedule 100%, but like also building the skill of resilience. And this kind of like goes across. One thing that I do as well is I focus on what's in my control. So I don't let anything that's not in my control really bother me that much. Like the weather will come and go. Yeah, I'm a bit like, oh well, it's not sunny. Like, but we live in the UK. Be realistic. Like, it's not gonna be sunny every single day. Like, so just having an awareness of what's in almost like that zone is just not worth thinking about, like, or not worth stressing about. Like, I can't change the weather, but I can change how I react. I can change how I think about things. I can change how I behave. So asking yourself over and over again, like what you can do to manage that is super important. And asking yourself how you can like have this control place like within like what you can control, focusing on that. And then other than that, leaving everything else to it.
Yeah. 100%. I think, especially within like the past like year or so for myself, that's been on the biggest things. Is just kind of like, okay, if something's out of my control, some shit has happened in life. It is what it is. It's a horrible saying, but it's something I haven't had control of. If it is something you then got to deal with, it's like, okay, what can I then do to then change this situation? It's a great thing, and this is why for me, and especially when you kind of like take a reflective process of things in life, and it could be a base of emotional eating, could be everyday life. If you just want to journal, this is such an important thing to be able to kind of recognize. Okay, this is the kind of things that I am able to control. This is the things that I have done to push myself forward, to be able to push the narrative forward that for the life that I want to live, and also to recognize, okay, certain things happened. It was outside of my control. Could I have dealt with it differently, essentially? And to have that kind of reflection, because we will all respond different to different events, and it's a great kind of learning curve essentially. I really really like that.
Yeah, 100%. And as you said there, like we'll all respond differently. So it's okay to kind of like do that. One thing that I have been reluctant to admit about how good it is journaling. Like it's something that I have kind of procrastinated. And the last, well, what, 5 months, I've really focused, basically in 2025, I've really focused on doing more journaling, being more present, like writing things down, writing my gratitude down. And God, it's improved my life so much. And I really hate the fact that it has improved my life so much because I'm like, damn it, I've just stopped. I didn't do this for so long because I knew the benefits were going to be there. But yeah, it's something I've kind of picked up, put down over my lifetime. But now it's something that I'm like, no, definitely need to continue with this because it just helps me alleviate stress so much. And yeah, like it's definitely worth doing. So if you're not journaling already, like actually starting to think about adding that in. I journal at the moment, first thing on the morning and last thing at night, like just kind of bookends my day. And that's been a really useful like thing for me to do just to get everything out of my head on an evening so that it's not sat up here and it's not bothering me whilst I'm going to sleep.
Yeah, I'm the exact same way. I've done journaling now for a little over a year, really every single day. And it's one of those things. It's like I never did it because I never liked the thought of me journaling. And I'm there like, you're an idiot. Why did it take me so long to do that? All I did was say I'm going to call it my morning intentions and evening reflections. I changed the
Yeah.
name of it, so there was no kind of like thing in place for me to do it. But it is one of the greatest ways that you can set yourself up for a good day, and then to be able to really, really just take that kind of time for yourself and reflect, and even just kind of draw it even to the sleep aspect, obviously, because we know how important sleep is to life and to bring down your stress levels. One of the biggest reasons why individuals can't sleep, or I think it is the biggest if I'm not mistaken, is because of overwhelming thoughts in their head. If you've got that constant overthinking, it is so difficult to get to sleep. When you start journaling, when you start reflecting on your day, you can then start kind of that unwind process, just write everything down. And then once you've wrote it down, bang, it's gone. It really does start to separate it. And it may sound daft to anybody who doesn't do it, because I was in that same thing. I was like, yeah, really. But after practicing it for such a long time, it is absolutely fantastic just to be able to write down that reflection, just to get it out on paper, and then you're done. It really separates the day.
For sure. And like you said, like it's something that you don't want to do, but it's so worth doing. And you once you're doing it, it's a lot easier to keep it as a habit as well. So this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, Nathan. But before we kind of wrap this up, I've got a question for you that I ask everybody. And it's what does being healthy mean for you?
Healthy for me, essentially, is being able just to live everyday life the way and the purpose that you essentially want to live it, in some way, shape, or form, and having the capabilities both within your body and mind to actually persevere and actually achieve the things you want to go out and do. It's not being able to be held back by certain factors, being able to be held back by our own inner thoughts or other individuals. It is, being able to head out on a walk and have the capability to do that. It's being able to head out for an evening meal with your partner and to be able to enjoy the experience. Doesn't essentially have to be healthy style of eating or anything like that. Of course, it is far more complex than that. But yeah, that's essentially what being healthy to me is.
And yeah, I massively agree. It's about the flexibility and freedoms to be able to do what you want when you want to do it, and having a body that can do those things as well. But yeah, no, that's absolutely fantastic. So Nathan, if people want to find you, they want to follow you on Instagram, TikTok, what's the handle? What's the username? Where's the best place to get you?
Amazing. If you do want to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, literally any, I think, social media platform available, all the same, it is at Coach Y Keevil. I will spell the last name out. It's Kevil, because no one on this planet can spell or even pronounce my surname. I've really shoehorned myself with that one.
That's perfect. I would highly recommend dropping Nathan a follow. He shares some cracking content, especially around like losing weight and as again the long term keeping it off. So yeah, definitely go drop you a follow. Thank you so much for coming on. If you've enjoyed this episode of Body Beyond the Scales, please make sure you drop a 5-star review, obviously for Nathan and all of his hard work. Otherwise, have an absolutely fantastic day, and I will catch you in the next one.